Yeah, when I was young. When I was young.
When I was young.
Yeah.
I've said that a lot this weekend. We're getting old.
We are. Well, I'm getting old.
Yeah, well,
You're
yeah.
eternally.
I'm still 20.
Becky.
I've been 25 for the last 10 years, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I've been 65 for the last 10 years. I look like I get bit by a werewolf, but the werewolf was Colonel Sanders.
Aware Sanders. Could be worse.
That would be a really good KFC commercial, like for Halloween. A guy who eats chicken and turns into Colonel Sanders.
That's great. I was actually imagining Colonel Sanders running through the woods, like biting somebody. But
that's
might be
even better. I think. It's both. It's a running.
I did a mural last year in Worcester, Massachusetts for Powwow Worcester. I drew like a giant 25-foot werewolf woman on the side of a building. It was great.
You made a mural that's 25 feet tall on the side of a building.
Yeah, it's a werewolf.
Is there anything that intimidates you, though?
Yeah, that intimidated me. Oh my God, I was so worried I was going to mess it all up. One of my old friends was involved in the festival, my friend Hank Von Hellion. I've known him maybe for like 20 years or something.
Hank Von Hellion?
Yeah. Yeah. Shout out
Is this
to my
dude
friend
like
Hank.
a 1970s DC horror comic character?
No, he's kind of like, I don't know, kind of a mod, I guess. He's great. He's an old friend of mine.
I expected him to like pick you up on a motorcycle with flaming tires. He's a werewolf.
Yeah, he might be. He's great. He's like, it's one of those people that I've known for so long. And like we grew up in New York. I went to college, in New York and met him just going to like punk shows and stuff. And we just kept in touch. He's like one of my only friends back from that time of my life,
Yeah.
And so he got really into like the street art scene and he's been working with Powwow back in Worcester. And he just called me up one day. He's like, hey, you want to, because we like see each other like once a year anyway. My family lives in New Hampshire. So I'm back up in like the Northeast. And he's like, you want to do this mural? And I was like, can I paint a giant werewolf woman? And it was intimidating. I got to use like a lift and everything. I got 2 different lifts, which was great. And I was so worried about messing it up. I was like, Hank, what if I mess it up? And he's like, you're not going to mess it up. And he's like, you're not allowed to mess it up. I was like, oh yeah, of course. So
you manifested just the confidence.
You just try really hard not to mess it up too bad.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, this is the thing that I still struggle with, is like I would get pages and I'm like, I know I should let this hand go.
Yeah.
But it's not communicating what I want it to communicate.
Exactly.
Like no one else is going to fucking know, but I know that this is not.
Some people might know. Yeah, I get hung up on shit like that where you're like, draw something and you just realize you sit back and you're like, I spent 8 hours trying to draw a dude's chin. It's like, it's just, why? I think that's just part of our werewolf curse, though, is like getting hung up on like the hand that just doesn't really work, or like the nose that looks a little wonky or something.
Yeah. And every little battle is, in theory, like adds up and helps you win the next one. Yeah,
these battles, no, those don't. Those are lost battles.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think those help at all. I think that's me not remembering how to let things go and like just remembering that people are only going to look at a panel for like 2 seconds. There are times when you get really stagnant and you can feel it when you're like, you haven't, right now I'm kind of in that slump where I'm doing a lot of work and it's stuff that's it's okay, but it's something that I've been like excited about really. So there's, sometimes you'll work on a picture or a project or a comic or whatever and you like get this like rush of like exhilaration and excitement and you love every second of it. And I feel like you're always kind of chasing that next project that will give you that same that same feeling. So I've been kind of like in between I guess passion projects like that for a little bit. And I think traveling does help like, invigorate your spirit, I suppose. Seeing new things,
Well, you're also prolific in the sense that like you have ideas.
I got a few ideas. Well, that's the great thing about it, though, is like you're always going to have another idea. So, like, if you don't get to do one, it's fine because tomorrow I'll have a different one.
That's a pretty Zen outlook.
Yeah. I mean, it's right now, it's Zen because it's Sunday at a con and I'm, you know, feeling reflective.
Uh-huh.
But when it's hard to, you have to remind this stuff to yourself when you're like in the thick of it, you know?
Right.
When you're having like the freakouts and the crisis of faith, you know? When I say faith, I mean like creative faith.
Yeah.
Faith in your creative self. You just have to like remind yourself like, oh yeah, I'll always have another idea. Which is important. I think when you like cling to something for too long, it's like, you know, you could overwork it or it gets, you know, kind of stale or whatever. It's easier to like take a step back too, like to put ego like in the back seat when you're not as precious about your ideas.
But that's what I find interesting about you, because like your attention seems to be drawn in a lot of different directions, but at the same time you're always making something.
That's important though, I think. You know, when you stop making something, and there's so many cool things to make.
Mm-hmm. You were telling me like you wrote a movie.
Yeah.
And like, you know.
I met a director up in Montreal and we made a short film. I wrote a short film that he directed in Paris. It was like.
So you write movies, make t-shirts,
yeah.
Sell prints and pins, make comics.
Yeah, my old roommate and I are doing a rock opera together.
Right.
Yeah.
So like you are clearly a person that gets up every day with some.
Yeah. There's always like, I don't know, I think as much as I like working on my own stuff too, like the writer, artist kind of, you know, stories and whatever, I think the real joy comes in like collaboration, you know?
Right.
When you're like, because you'll always get something new. You know, people are going to come at you with like new ideas and challenge the way that you think and the way that you approach a project, and it kind of opens up your eyes to like different ways of trying things. And yeah, and I think I had to learn how to be a good collaborator for sure. Yeah. And I started working in comics as an artist, working with writers, and that's one type of collaboration. And then working as a writer, working with artists is another type of collaboration. And then, yeah, co-writing a book, you know, I've done that, and that's, you know, that can be difficult. Like learning that your idea might not be the best idea. You have to like figure out what's going to serve the story best. And I think putting the book first or putting the work first, it's like been an important lesson that you keep learning over and over, you know, because you have to like relearn how to do these things. Right. I haven't drawn a comic in like 3 years because I've been writing. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Writing is great. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm drunk with power. I have all the power. Make everyone dance for me. I got really burnt out on comics. You know, because like it's your monthly book, and you can only do like one book at a time. And if something doesn't work, it's like you've just wasted. It feels like you've wasted like a year of your life, and that's like a really difficult thing to like. And when it happens, you know, fairly regularly, it's like, well, what am I even doing? Like, I don't like it. And I always used to tell myself when I was younger, when I was young, I'd be like, well, I love drawing comics so much, but like, what happens if I don't love it anymore? I'm like, oh, I should just stop doing it, because it's not the type of job that you can do if you don't love, because it's like, you'll just wither and die. It's depressing. So I woke up one day and I was like, man, I just don't love doing this anymore. I don't even really like doing it anymore. I still love drawing, but like I was just, you know, it's a lot. So I was like, I'm gonna still stay in comics. I'm gonna write more, get more ideas out, and like work with other artists and like try to get back.
I feel like very fractured about it, in the sense that like I feel like I owe it to myself to see I'm in a position where success in a real, tangible way, where I could be an autonomous thing, is within my reach. Yeah. And I need to fulfill that. And then on the other hand, you start to become acutely aware that time is you're not always going to have another day.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have a responsibility to myself to live too.
Yeah. It's my right to have a weekend.
People who are wired like us too, you got to think that like editors and people who are invested in our creativity at this point, they just got to trust that like, look at how much stuff we make when we're not supposed to be doing anything. Yeah. Like we can't turn it off.
Yeah, that's true.
There's this thing within my grasp still that I haven't quite latched onto. there's still a comic in me that I could draw that I think is the perfect example of me, of my work.
Yeah.
And I haven't quite.
But that's always going to change, though.
Yeah, I know.
The comic that's like, it's like your perfect you right now, in 5 years is not, you're going to be like, oh, I'm such a different person now. You're not trying to tell the same stories. Like, the stories that I had 5 years ago that I'm like, maybe one day I'll get around to doing, like...
They're not the same to you anymore.
They're not the same to me, but that story, I can still change that and like update it. But it's like that time of my life is like, you know, I'm a different person than I was.
Yeah.
So the stories that I want to tell become different.
Yeah.
And the way that I approach them is different.
To me, it is as simple as like I'm trying to form a connection with the audience.
Exactly. One of my first thoughts when I'm making a new book is like, what do I want people to feel when they close the book? And I think about that, like, what am I trying to communicate? Like, where do I want to leave the reader? Mm-hmm. What are the things, like, if they go back and reread it, why are they rereading it? And like thinking about that kind of.
That's interesting. I always just think like I never try to write towards an answer. I just like keep asking questions.
Yeah, I guess I'm writing towards a feeling.
Yeah, the interesting thing about drawing your own stories is that you can control the tone a lot easier. And when you hand it off to another person, sometimes, like the most disappointed I've ever been is when the tone is wrong.
That's true.
When I'm just like, it's not necessarily what you drew, it's that what you drew doesn't.
It's not communicated like.
Yeah, it doesn't have the pace and the mood and the atmosphere that sells this story. You know?
Yeah, my best collaborations were with people when we were in like the same room. So when we were doing Gotham Academy, and then so it was me, Brendan Fletcher, and Carl Kerschel. We were all in the same studio in Montreal. So we just would get together and like talk about the characters and talk about the story and talk about like what was gonna happen, and it just became like we just sit around and we had so many in-jokes, and it was like having a great time, and that gets put on the page. And I think when you finish up a book like that, because we're all like in the same place, exactly on the same page, you know? And the same thing with like Andy Belanger and Southern Cross. We started that when I was up in Montreal, and like just being able to sit down and see him every day and be like, okay, let's talk about these characters. Let's talk about like where we want the story to go, and like. You
mean Andy Belanger?
Andy Belanger, yeah. And Bob the Animal Anger.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things ever.
Yeah,
that dude's wrestling.
When he was talking about that, he's like, I always just wanted to wrestle, and I'm like, just do it. And he actually like, I ended up meeting a bunch of wrestlers up there, and then just hanging out with them, and then joining them. And he's like, you're never too old to do anything.
I told him I want to be his manager for one, like I would dress as Colonel Sanders.
Yes.
But now I should be Werewolf Colonel Sanders.
Yes.
I should be like Colonel Sanders. I should be a normal guy.
What if you were Colonel Sanders, but Bob the Animal Anger bit you?
And I turned into a werewolf.
And you got like a werewolf kind of, because you got like the like.
I was thinking I would be a regular guy who comes out with like a bucket of chicken, and like people like I get smacked around.
And Yana loves chicken.
Yeah, and I keep getting smacked around, and then I eat the chicken like spinach, and like then I rip off my clothes and I'm Colonel Sanders.
Amazing. But then you got to wrestle.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I don't have to win. I just have to wrestle.